In the quiet, sun-drenched suburbs of Torrance, California, St. James Catholic School stood as a beacon of faith and education. For decades, it was guided by Sister Mary Margaret Kreuper. She was more than a principal, a matriarch, a spiritual guide, a living symbol of piety. Parents believed in her devotion and moral compass, the kind of nun you see in movies, gentle yet firm, dedicated to God and community. But behind that familiar habit was a staggering secret, a story that defied belief, a narrative so shocking it felt torn from a script. The beloved nun who preached virtue was accused of a crime that shattered trust. The allegations were breathtaking, a decade-long scheme siphoning over $800,000 from the school. Not mismanagement, calculated deception, by a woman who had taught right from wrong. And the shockwaves rippled far beyond Torrance. For nearly 3 decades, she anchored St. James. She arrived as a teacher in the 1960s, an earnest sister of St. Joseph of Carondelet. She rose to principal, serving 28 years with apparent dedication. To parents, to students, to parishioners. She was a constant, a source of stability and moral guidance. She knew every family, every child's strengths and struggles, a traditionalist upholding rigorous academics and strong Catholic values, firm but loving, admired by many, a guardian of moral and spiritual growth, urging support for the mission. Her authority went unquestioned, rooted in faith and care. St. James was a family across generations. She was everywhere, always with a kind word. No one fathomed the secret life eroding the foundation she vowed to protect. From 2008 to 2018, she devised a methodical theft. Checks for tuition and donations were diverted. Instead of the school's account, funds flowed into secret accounts she controlled. Hidden coffers unknown to administrators. She falsified records and manipulated statements, crafting a false narrative of struggle. She pled poverty to parents, insisting every penny mattered. With unchecked control over books and collections, her deception flourished behind closed doors. No one questioned the gentle elder they trusted. Few imagined the funds fed a secret life. The money fueled a hidden obsession, gambling. Trips to Las Vegas and Lake Tahoe, frequent high-stakes bets, far from vows of poverty. Trips planned to avoid suspicion, explained as retreats or family visits. Tuition and donations became casino chips, lost to the glittering machine. The saint by day, a high roller by night. In 2018, after 28 years of devoted service as principal, Sister Mary Margaret Kreuper announced her retirement. For the Archdiocese of Los Angeles, this meant a standard changing of the guard, a process that included a routine financial audit of St. James Catholic School. It was considered a formality, a simple closing of the books on one era before beginning the next. No one expected to find anything amiss. After all, this was Sister Mary Margaret's school, a place built on faith, discipline, and trust. The initial auditors began their work, sifting through years of ledgers and financial statements, likely expecting a straightforward if tedious task. But soon a quiet unease began to ripple through the process. Small, nagging inconsistencies started to surface. A few tuition payments that seemed to be recorded but not deposited. Donation totals from fundraisers that didn't quite match the bank statements. At first, they were dismissed as simple clerical errors, the kind of minor mistakes expected in any small school's bookkeeping. But the errors weren't isolated. They formed a pattern. As the auditors dug deeper, the small discrepancies grew into significant shortfalls. Alarmed, the Archdiocese made a crucial decision. They called in a team of forensic accountants. This was no longer a routine audit. This was an investigation. The forensic team descended, their approach methodical and skeptical. They weren't just checking the math, they were hunting for deception. They painstakingly cross-referenced every tuition check received against the school's official bank deposit records. They scrutinized pledge cards from bake sales and charity drives, comparing them to the funds that actually made it to the school's accounts. The gap between what the school had and what it had was staggering. It wasn't a leak, it was a gaping hole. Hundreds of thousands of dollars were simply gone. The investigators traced the flow of money, or rather the lack thereof. They noticed that for years the school's revenue reports seemed unusually low for an institution of its size and reputation. The numbers just didn't reflect a thriving community. The real breakthrough came when an accountant, following a hunch, began searching for other bank accounts linked to the school or its employees. And there they were. 2 secret accounts, opened long ago, that were not on any official school records. One was an old, forgotten savings account in the school's name. The other was a convent account, supposedly for the living expenses of the nuns. Suddenly, the entire puzzle snapped into place. The forensic team began tracing checks for tuition, checks from donation envelopes, and discovered they weren't being deposited into the school's main account. Instead, they were being funneled directly into these two hidden accounts. The paper trail was a damning narrative written in deposit slips and withdrawal statements. For at least a decade, money meant for textbooks, teacher salaries, and school maintenance had been systematically siphoned away. With the evidence compiled into thick binders, the Archdiocese summoned Sister Mary Margaret. The meeting was somber, held in a quiet, sterile room far from the familiar comfort of her principal's office. Across the table, church officials and the lead accountant laid out the case. They showed her the forged endorsements on the backs of checks. They presented the statements from the secret accounts, detailing years of deposits and withdrawals. There was no room for denial, no plausible explanation. The evidence was absolute, a meticulous chronicle of her betrayal. Faced with the sheer, undeniable weight of the paper trail, her carefully constructed world of piety and authority simply disintegrated. She confessed, not with defiance, but with a quiet resignation. She admitted to everything. She explained how she would take cash and checks intended for the school and deposit them into the St. James Convent account and another savings account. She had been the sole signatory on these accounts, giving her complete and unsupervised control. The scheme was shockingly simple, relying on the one thing she had cultivated for decades: absolute trust. Later, in a letter to the school community, she put her confession in writing. There were no attempts to justify her actions, no pleas for pity. Her words were stark and direct. "I have sinned," she wrote. "I have broken the law and I have no excuses." She admitted that her actions violated her vows, her faith, and the sacred trust placed in her by generations of families who had sacrificed to send their children to St. James. But the deception didn't end with her. The investigation revealed she had an accomplice. Sister Lana Chang, a former teacher and vice principal who had retired alongside Kreuper, had also been aware of the scheme. When confronted, she too expressed deep remorse for her part in the fraud and for not stopping it. The betrayal was deeper than anyone had imagined, a conspiracy of two women who had dedicated their lives to the church, now exposed for preying on the faith of their own community. On February 7, 2022, 80-year-old Sister Mary Margaret Kreuper entered a Los Angeles federal courtroom as a criminal defendant. The room was filled with former students, parents, and colleagues. Most striking was her attire. The black and white habit she'd worn for 6 decades was gone, replaced by simple civilian clothes, a visual confirmation of her fall from grace. Prosecutors laid out a decade-long systematic deception. For 10 years, Sister Kreuper had diverted over $835,000 in tuition checks and donations. The money funded a secret life of frequent gambling trips to Las Vegas and Lake Tahoe. Arguing the profound breach of trust demanded significant punishment. The prosecution recommended a sentence of 2 years in federal prison. Her defense countered, speaking of her nearly 60 years of devout service to the Catholic Church. They argued her actions were not born of greed, but of a compulsive gambling addiction that had warped her judgment. They framed the crimes as an aberration in an otherwise exemplary life of service. U.S. District Judge Otis D. Wright II was tasked with balancing a lifetime of good works against a staggering financial crime. Before passing sentence, he turned to Kreuper. Acknowledging her long career, he asked, "You have been a teacher to many, but what is the lesson here?" Through tears, Kreuper admitted she had sinned, broken her vows and the law, and was profoundly sorry. Then the sentence: 1 year and 1 day in federal prison. The punishment was designed to honor the rule of law and validate the victim's pain, while still acknowledging her age and remorse. In the gallery, the reaction was a quiet mix of relief, disappointment, and sorrow. There were no winners. The judge's decision was informed by letters that revealed a community profoundly split. Many pleaded for leniency, citing her decades of sacrifice and seeing the crimes as a tragic aberration. To them, she was family. But other parents demanded justice. They wrote of their own sacrifices to afford tuition, and how learning their money-funded gambling trips felt like a profound violation. They wondered what their children had gone without: updated textbooks, art programs, so their principal could play the slots. The community was torn between forgiveness and accountability. In his final remarks, Judge Wright seemed to answer the divide. He acknowledged the support, but emphasized the gravity of the crime, concluding that while compassion was warranted, so were consequences. The sentence sent a clear message: no one is above the law. The court's decision drew a painful line, a judgment that satisfied no one completely, but sought to restore balance. And while the legal chapter was closing, the emotional one remained wide open. For the community of St. James, the long, difficult process of healing had only just begun. On February 7, 2022, Sister Mary Margaret Kreuper's public life reached its conclusion in a federal courtroom. The judge handed down a sentence of 1 year and 1 day in prison, a term making her eligible for time off for good behavior. Before reporting, however, there was an interim period of waiting. Due to public health concerns, her surrender date was delayed. In the months following, she returned to a cloistered existence within her convent. The familiar halls now felt like a cage. Her freedom was gone, replaced by what was, in effect, house arrest. Forbidden from leaving the grounds, her contact with the outside world was severely limited. The woman who once held absolute authority was now a recluse under the watchful eyes of her own religious sisters. The Sisters of St. Joseph of Carondelet, Kreuper's order for over 60 years, moved swiftly to address the fallout. Cooperating fully with the investigation, they issued a public statement calling her actions a grave breach of their sacred vows and the community's trust. Their response went beyond words. In a significant act of restitution, the order repaid every dollar of the $835,000 stolen from St. James Catholic School, a necessary step to make the school whole again. For Kreuper, the consequences were severe. She was stripped of all authority and removed from public ministry, a profound fall from grace within her own spiritual family. In June of 2022, the day of reckoning arrived. At 80 years old, Kreuper reported to FCI Aliceville, a low-security federal prison. The serene quiet of the convent was replaced by the harsh, institutional reality of prison life. Her identity was stripped away. She was no longer Sister Mary Margaret, but Federal Inmate 21109-112. Her religious habit was exchanged for a standard-issue prison uniform. The educator of thousands officially became a prisoner. A new, humbling rhythm replaced her former life, a life of roll calls, regimented meals, and menial prison jobs. The principal's office had been traded for a concrete cell. Her public story had concluded. Now the private journey of atonement could begin. In court, she confessed, "I have sinned, I have broken the law, and I have no excuses." The judge's gavel fell, and justice was served. While some parents felt the sentence was too lenient, it was a deeply symbolic moment that officially affirmed the harm done. For the families of St. James, this was more than a legal verdict. It was validation. After years of their concerns being dismissed, the sentencing was an unequivocal statement that their pain was real and their trust had been violated. A long-held reputation had yielded to painful responsibility. The scandal became a catalyst for sweeping systemic change within the Archdiocese of Los Angeles. The era of a single individual holding unchecked financial control was over. New policies mandated a clear separation of duties, a two-signature rule for large expenditures, and frequent independent audits. The case became a textbook example of why trust, while essential, must always be paired with verification. It was a hard-learned lesson that true faith cannot rest on blind trust. It must be built on a bedrock of proven honesty. And still, through the wreckage of betrayal, hope endures. The community of St. James began the slow process of rebuilding. This wasn't just about balancing ledgers. It was about restoring faith in the school, in its leadership, and in the church itself. The school doors remain open. Children still fill the classrooms. New leadership is in place, operating under a new system of accountability. The shadow of the scandal lingers as a permanent reminder of the fragility of trust. But in its wake, a stronger, more vigilant community has begun to emerge, determined to heal and build a future worthy of its children.